We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Fear the old blood.
Hello there, Sir from 17 once again. This is my Bloodborne video walkthrough. This is the very beginning of the game, and we're going to be going through Central Yarnham to pick up some bloodstones and to open up some shortcuts. This is going to be a comprehensive walkthrough to help players of all skill levels beat the game, and to do so as decisively as I can help you do. At the very beginning here, you're going to be faced with your first werewolf of the game in an encounter that a lot of people think is meant to be failed, but you can in fact avoid it and you can in fact win it. However, I'm going to choose to skip it because as much as killing it with your fists can be impressive, it's more boring than anything else and you actually get nothing for doing it, which I think is incredibly disappointing. Throughout this walkthrough you're going to see me use a variety of different weapons, mainly the stake driver and the saw cleaver. I'm probably going to advise against certain choices that I'm going to be making in the videos, but the strategies herein should help you get through in any circumstance, and I can also tell you better ways of doing things, because at the moment I do believe that probably a quality build is the best direction to go, or a strength build and focusing on one of the more damaging strength weapons. But I will go into detail and I will elaborate on why I think that in future episodes in this walkthrough.
Welcome to the Hunter's Dream. This will be your home. For now.
So this is the Hunter's Dream. We're going to be able to pick up our trick weapon and our firearm. I'm going to pick the saw cleaver, and I'm also going to be picking the pistol, the Hunter's pistol. The pistol choice is entirely preference, guys. If you want to choose the blunderbuss, you can do. It is much more consistent at hitting things at close range, and you get a lot less incidents of missing, which can be incredibly costly in a game like Bloodborne. I choose it because I just prefer it personally, and I'm not a big fan of the blunderbuss. I also enjoy the range it gives me because it enables me to space a little bit better. And of course I picked the saw cleaver because I honestly believe it to be one of the best weapons in the game. The saw cleaver's transformation attack has a heavy property, as I get hit there by the flaming torch of the huntsmans that we're now taking on. The huntsmans are divided into different classes depending on what weapon they use. You can see a cutlass there, you saw a pitchfork, and you saw a flaming torch. The torch guys are always going to be the more dangerous because the torch attack is so unbelievably quick, it'll catch out even the most experienced of players. Another thing about this walkthrough is I'm not going to be absent-mindedly skipping everything, which I could do because it's very easy to do, and I indeed would recommend you do it yourself if you know what you're doing. But because this is a walkthrough, I want to show you, how to approach the game, how to get to certain areas, and if I were to just avoid the enemies, however it is a fantastic strategy, it's not going to help those people who can't do that. So it's my choice to try and get in as many engagements as I possibly can, with a few tasteful retreats here and there. But the saw cleaver has a really fast attack animation, and its transformation animation has a heavy impact. And the impact on this game is something quite interesting, because it dictates whether or not you're going to interrupt an enemy when you attack them. So the standard lights of the saw cleaver have a light impact, which for enemies where light impacts enough to stop their animation is perfectly fine, but not every enemy will have that. So having a heavy impact is the heaviest thing you can do with an attack to interrupt an enemy's attack. And because the move comes out so quickly, as I get pitchforked, very rare for that guy to follow you as far as he did just then, but it can happen. Stranger things have happened in Yarnham. Speaking of strange things, you're going to be introduced to the crows over here. This is a very strange enemy that drops pebbles. They're not that damaging or that dangerous, but if they hit you, they do stun lock you, and in this game there is no way to get out of stun locks, so you need to be incredibly conscious of that. This is a huntsman's minion. He's a big dude, but there's a guaranteed parry here. I was a little sloppy on it there because I got hit, but it'll give me the regain to bring my life back, so it's not too bad. All you have to do is hit him once, and then wait for him to start his animation, and you'll get the parry every time. However, it's not called a parry in this game, folks, it's called an interrupt, but I'm going to speak about those a little bit later on. But impact of your weapon is incredibly important. The heavier your weapon, the more impact it's going to have. Generally, the slower the attack is going to be, which is one of the reasons why the transformation attack for this weapon is so useful. And it's one of the main staples that I'm going to be using throughout this entire walkthrough. The added bonus of it is some of the passive damages that it receives thanks to some systems that are not that well explained within Bloodborne, but you can find out about them on the wikis and in the official walkthrough. And that is the difference between serrated damage and righteous damage. So certain enemies will be affected by serrated damage. They are mostly beasts. This applies to beast bosses and beast enemies, and it's usually larger ones, so the standard huntsmen, even though they do have the elongated beast arm, don't actually count under that criteria. And the opposite side of this is righteous. Certain enemies will be vulnerable to righteous damage, and certain weapons have righteous damage. For a full example of all of them, I recommend you search for it as we open the shortcut up here, but I will explain that, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. The Kirkhammer, for example, when you are using it in its sword form, the sword is classed as a righteous weapon, so it will do additional damage to enemies weak to righteousness. The threaded cane is unique, in fact, because when you use it as a cane, it is a righteous weapon and gets the additional damage bonus with properties against enemies that are weak to that, and then when you turn it into the crazy whip, it gets a serrated bonus, so it will do bigger damage against things like the werewolves we just ran past then. Very important to know here, guys. Those two werewolves have killed me more times than most of the bosses in this game. They are incredibly dangerous, and if you get unlucky, which is so easy to do in this game, they will chain stagger you to death. And there is not much you can do about it except learn from your experience and try not to have it happen again. They often will not follow you down here, but because I'm recording, of course they do. But did you see how the hit just then stunned him when I transfer? Oh, and there's the second one. Yeah, you want to be real careful. You don't have to dally like I was doing. Just get over here, get away from it, and just come back a little bit later when you've got a little bit more damage. That being said, it's more than easy to kill them. You can lure them into the room that I was in, that I went through before I hit the bridge, and you can trap them in the doorway. A very effective strategy. This right here is one of the more interesting werewolves. Be very careful with that enemy, because later on he becomes considerably harder to interrupt when it comes to staggering him off of impact, so just be aware of that. They do get hyper armor. It is something in this game that took me a lot of time to get used to, and I still don't 100% enjoy it. To give you a little bit of information on that, I am going to speak much more about it in the coming episodes, but hyper armor, for people who don't know, is a term that probably derived from the armor of fighting games, where you were able to take a hit without flinching. It was something that was present in Demon Souls. It was something that became a mechanic in Dark Souls known as poise, and in Bloodborne, apparently it's to do with this impact system. And all it means is the enemies have an invisible value, and when you hit them, that value decreases. When that value decreases to a certain threshold, they will be interrupted and flinch, and you will stop whatever they are doing. However, some moves, some properties just don't seem to be interruptible at all. Certain heavier attacks, certain heavier creatures, certain bosses for instance, there's just no point. And if you try, you're going to take a big hit. And understanding this can take a while, because in a lot of cases being first and being fast is a great advantage in this game. However, every so often it's going to get you caught with some pretty big damage, so you need to be aware of it, you need to learn which enemies have it, which enemies do it the most, and know where you stand with them, because it can be so dangerous to not understand the value of it. Back up there on the precipice, we picked up the Hunter's Garb, which I'm put on now. I'm going to be wearing this for the full duration of the game. You cannot upgrade your armor in Bloodborne, which is going to definitely throw a lot of Souls fans off. However, the armor itself doesn't make that much of a difference. It's more of a Demon Souls stylistic choice than it is an actual functional Dark Souls choice. That right there was the running R2, something worth knowing. There are additions in Bloodborne which differ from Souls games. You can now do rolling R2s and running R2s. You can also alternate what you do depending on what the buttons you press, which is really nice to see. Of course, it's because it's a transformation attack, so it's nothing too fancy, but it's still interesting that they give you the ability to alternate between, you know, the left and right side to get different effects. That right there was a charge attack on the Hunter's minion. Afterwards, it's going to open him up for something called a visceral attack, which is an incredibly powerful riposte. However, you'll probably not see me doing too many backstabs, just because of the way the mechanic has changed. However, talking to the girl in the window is incredibly important. You'll notice I sat down. That's because the 6-axis accidentally activates taunts, because apparently I move around a lot when I play. I never do it intentionally, and I've been lucky enough to never have it happen in any really bad situation, but every conversation I get into, it fucking does that, so you need to be aware that it happens so that you don't get yourself in a spot of bother. Earlier on, you'll notice that I used the pungent blood cocktail that I have right now. Think of it as an alluring skull from Dark Souls. It is something that enables you to try and get the computer away from you. Certain enemies it works well on, other enemies completely ignore it. Of course, experimentation is your best friend when it comes to finding out which ones will help you and which ones won't. It also works on certain bosses. There is an incredibly powerful strategy against the blood-starved beast, where you throw a pungent blood cocktail into a corner, and then you just stun-lock his ass as he tries to get to it. Insanely viable as far as strategies goes, but I'm not going to show that in this walkthrough. Just food for thought. There was another taunt. But there was another taunt, so I talked to this person because I want to get a rune from them later on in the game. She's going to give you a bold hunter's mark, which is the equivalent of a homeward bone. However, it doesn't work quite as well as the homeward bones, because I think it should send you back to the hunter's dream, and it only sends you back to the lanterns. So it enables you to then sit through a loading screen that's completely superfluous and unneeded, which is a little frustrating, but the load times now are considerably better than they were at launch, so it's much easier to forgive them. But when you drop down here, there's going to be a guy with a gun, and there's going to be a couple of the werewolves, but I'm not going to mess with them, because I want to carry on down here to continue to get resources to upgrade our weapon. The choice to get enough resources to upgrade before the first few bosses is completely up to you. The difference it makes is nominal, but it's going to set you up in future, and it's going to just make things that little bit easier. You don't have to do it. There's nothing pushing you to do it, but there is a comfort that comes in knowing that your weapon is on its way to being more powerful. And I'm going to show you a little shortcut here, which is probably well known by everybody, but it's one of those things where you wouldn't think you could do that, but you can, and it's nice to see. So, kill the crows, pick up the oil urns. Oil in this game is a fantastic accelerant of fire damage, and if you throw it on somebody before you do fire damage, you get double damage effectively. I think that's the way it works out. A lot of the times it's not as big as you think it might be, but it can still make a difference, and it's still worth checking out. As I get landed on by a crow, and I go into a lovely little flinch animation. But we've got a minute or so before we get to the end of this video, so I'm going to briefly talk about the interrupt system. So whenever an enemy is about to attack you, there is a brief window where you can shoot them with your gun and interrupt them. If you do this correctly, you will hear the chime, you will get a stun state on the enemy, and you'll be able to do a very fancy visceral attack. That there's a charge move, very powerful stuff. That was an interrupt just there, and that was the visceral attack to kill it. The cool thing about this is later on we're going to get runes that enable that to give us things. For instance, you can make it replenish bullets, you can make it replenish life, you can make it do quite a lot of things and give you increased blood echoes when you kill things with it. So it's a commodity you want to be very familiar with, because it's going to save your life and indeed take many lives throughout the course of your journey. Additionally to that, you want to know about the regain system, which I haven't really touched on because I haven't really had the time. But this game features a system where you have a window after taking damage where you can recoup some of that damage if you're aggressive enough. This breeds a very aggressive mentality in Bloodborne, which will breed success, but it'll also breed failure if you don't know how to do it intelligently. Because although the game seems to be about being balls to the wall aggressive and mindless, it really isn't. There is a hell of a lot more here about knowing when to strike than just sheer number of strikes, and it's something that you're going to learn over time, and hopefully throughout the course of these videos I'm going to be able to help you, speed up that improvement time. But all I'm doing here is returning back to Hunter's Dream. Now we've got all the things that I wanted. We've picked up a nice assortment of bloodstones, and we're going to put a level or two into our weapon depending on what we can do. And then in the next video we're going to retrace our steps back through the elevator, back across the bridge, and we're going to be fighting one of the first bosses of the game, who's also one of the most difficult. So thank you very much for watching, and welcome to my Bloodborne walkthrough.